My job today is really, I'm the warm-up act, because John and Tony are going to speak afterwards. They'll speak a language which is familiar to many of you as consultants and growers. But my role is just to explain what's going on here and the intentions of this initiative. So the aims are really to create an initiative by combining or running in parallel 4 otherwise separate projects, one on non-wetting, one on soil compaction, one on subsoil constraints, and one on soil acidity. Now, none of these are new topics, and you'll be familiar with those words from many years previously. But the difference here is we're trying to combine them, trying to get synergies between them, trying to address a whole of industry question rather than just the topic within an individual project. But it's also important to recognize that soil constraints don't exist in isolation, and there's a need to connect to other soils projects in relation to nutrition, soil biology, soil carbon, and so on. And to do this, we need a steering committee which is independent, which uses many people from industry, rather than being a self-serving committee which is comprised of GRDC or DAFWA people. So that's the overall aim. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail, then pass over to my co-authors. So the background is pretty clear to all of you, I think. We've got the potential for rising yields, but the concern and understanding about water use efficiency points to the fact that in many years, subsoil constraints or constraints within the soil system are actually inhibiting achieving those potential yields. These constraints cost a lot of money. And although GRDC is invested in individual projects on particular topics over many years, there's a need to take a longer-term view, to take a more holistic view about constraints within the soil system, and not just assuming it is just acidity or just compaction or just non-wetting. This coincides with GRDC trying to badge likewise investments under a banner called an initiative. And there's some examples there of initiatives which have been run in previous years. Precision agriculture. There was a soil constraints initiative which finished in 2008. Soil biology, where there have been more than one phase. Grain and graze. Maximising profit for crop nutrition, and so on. And most recently, there's a crown rot and a national frost initiative as well. But why have an initiative? The fact that you've got 4 projects sitting in the same room doesn't mean you're going to get any added benefit from it. So there's just a few reasons here to think about. At a local level, most of you can identify a soil, you can identify the problems it's likely to have. But almost certainly, there'll be more than one constraint operating in that soil. You won't necessarily know which one is dominant, which one has to be managed in the short term, which one has to have a more long-term perspective. So we're trying to quantify the interactions and the additive effects between soil constraints to develop a management system. If you look at it from a regional perspective, it's interesting that all the RCSN groups have identified these constraints as being important. So on the left-hand side of that diagram, we've got the non-wetting pH, compaction, subsoil constraints problems. You've got the 5 port zones across the top, the RCSN zones. And you can see that in nearly all cases, those groups have identified those factors as being of key importance for the future. If you take a national perspective, GRDC have followed the line started in the West that have now created their own national soil constraints initiative. And 3 of the topics that we're talking about will contribute to that national initiative. And the advantage there is you start to get wider networks, you get better sharing of experiences, you can share methodologies, you can talk about effective extension methods, and you can develop some consistency and some efficiency across the whole of the country. There's some words there which appear in the current GRDC investment plan, and I think they're fairly self-evident. That growers are aware of the impacts of constraints by looking at the actual yield compared to the water-limited yield potential. And identifying the most effective way to manage these is high priority. But if you go even further and you take an international perspective, as you probably know, 2015 is the International Year of the Soils. There'll be further mention of it during these crop updates. And it's all about healthy soils for a healthy life, which again we heard in the plenary sessions this morning. I won't read through all of the words on there, but the key objectives of having an international year and focus on soils is to emphasize it's fundamentally important for human life, for crop nutrition, mitigation of climate change, sustainable production systems, and so on. And the last point is not trivial either, in that every country and sometimes every region within a country has its own soil classification schemes, which sometimes make it difficult to transfer information from one environment to another and to share experiences across environments. So there's a plea there for consistent monitoring and definition systems for soils. So having got through all that, we have a quick look now at the range of soils which exist in WA. Those came from the My Soil website of the department. I'm sure you can identify with at least one of those. In a perfect world, in a perfect year, none of them pose any constraints. They'll all be highly productive. But of course, we don't work in a perfect environment or a perfect year, and all have their own constraints. And if you look at the set on the right-hand side, the duplex soils, which are a uniquely WA invention, they invariably have more than one constraint. In some cases, you can have all four constraints there. Now, for industry to understand how those constraints operate and how to make decisions in managing them is the challenge that we're really trying to address here. I've got 4 brief slides to describe the individual projects. All of this is in the paper that's in the proceedings. So again, the intention here is not to read every word, but just recognize that non-wetting is very widespread. The purpose of the project is partly research, but partly developing decisions and best bets for managing non-wetting as part of a farming system. And the third point there is also very important, in that DAFWA and GRDC have recognized the need to maintain research capacity in the soils area in the future. And this project will actively recruit 2 new scientists and graduates to start working in this area. They'll be the investment in the future, if you like. The second project is Acidity. Now, if you've been to every one of the previous 20 crop updates, you will have heard acidity mentioned at probably 18 of those. And Chris Gazy, who's here, is a champion of soil acidity and acidity management. But the technical solutions are well known. The problem is that not enough deep soil testing is being done, and therefore the line recommendations which have been developed to manage surface acidity are not applying for the whole profile. So this project takes an industry-wide focus. This is going right from the lime pit through to the application on farm. So it's not just a technical solution in the field, it's looking at the whole of the industry in an attempt to double lime use and create better soils for the future. The third one is subsoil constraints, which David Hall is managing from Esperance. And as well as the constraints I've already talked about, there are nutrient deficiencies and toxicities, and other things you can see on the top there: acidity, waterlogging, alkalinity, high boron levels, and salinity. The diagnostics of these are actually quite difficult. If several of them occur in one profile or one paddock, you may be able to work out what they are, but you won't necessarily know which are the best ones to treat in the short term versus the long term, and what the phase of investment should be so you finish up 10 years down the track in a better position. One of the options with subsoil constraints is you may do nothing, but unless you know what the constraint is and the cost of fixing it, you can't make that decision. And the last one is the impact of soil compaction. Probably not well recognized, or not well enough recognized. But like all the other constraints, it restricts root growth, therefore it restricts water uptake, and therefore water use efficiency and crop yield. The technical solutions are quite well known, quite well defined. Their adoption and their widespread management is less clear. And that's really the focus of Paul's project. Not so much repeating technical information for the sake of it, but trying to get the methods understood, incorporated, costed, and built into a farming system. Steering committee. We need a group of wise men to keep this lot on track. And this has been done by asking a representative from each of the RCSNs to join, the 4 project leaders from DAFWA, John Even is a Western Panel member and a Canberra manager from GRDC, and myself as an independent chair. And as needed, we can bring in experts or people with a particular point of view to help explain what we've been doing. That committee will meet twice a year, minimum. We've already had some opening discussions, and not surprisingly, that's thrown up some challenges which are quite significant. And I'll just talk quickly to those and then hand over to the other guys. First of all, we talk a lot about integration, adding value by having an initiative. But what does that actually mean? The fact that you've got a steering committee doesn't mean that you're going to do things any differently. We've talked about sharing field sites, field days, presentations, some of the outputs, planning things jointly so that when in the future phase of investment, you get a more targeted project. But a lot of this still has to be tested. A particularly important point is how you deliver information and how you affect practice change. And again, that was referred to this morning in the GRDC talk in the plenary. There's any number of ways of doing this. Every researcher has a different way of presenting information. Every grower, every audience has a different way of receiving information. There is no simple answer here. And I think if there's one big challenge in trying to get this stuff adopted, it's sorting out some of these problems. Equally, economics are important. A technical solution that doesn't work or is short-term is of no value in the long term. Decision support tools, now generally known as apps. There's 2 opinions. In fact, there's 2 populations in the world I've discovered, those who understand and appreciate apps and those who don't. And if you talk to our steering committee, you find that most of them can't see the point of an app because they don't want to use them. Nonetheless, they're going to be generated as part of a research process. What's their value? How can we see them effectively incorporated in farming systems? And complexity. I think that's self-evident. So 3 key messages from me. First of all, this is a substantial investment looked at as straight dollar terms, 33 million over 5 years into these major constraints. It has input from growers to help us set direction, and industry groups from GRDC and the agencies. And it's the components of a new GRDC National Soil Constraints Initiative. So now I'm going to stop and invite John to come up and continue the presentation.
Thanks, Bob. So what are these subsoil constraints actually costing us? So some figures that were done in 2009. So this is WA only. So from non-wetting, approximately 250 million a year. Acidity, 498. Compaction, 333. And the other subsoil constraints being your acidity, boron, waterlogging, etc., about 600 million a year. So this is every year. So 1.681 billion per year is costing growers in WA. So this shows the scale of the issue. If we take, for example, the losses from frost on average in WA when we have a frost event, about $400 million a year. And this is about 4 times that. Frost is visual. This subsoil constraint is like the silent cost. We don't really see it. I'm not saying frost is not important. As you all know, it's a major priority of the Western Panel, and we have a national initiative on it. So the GRDC investment, you'll notice that Bob's, one of his slides had the total investment was 33 million. That's the total collaborative investment. GRDC's investment is, in this project is about 15 million over 5 years. So our investment is less than 1% of the total loss. So if we set our 1.681 billion, we're investing less than 1% is 16.8 million. So we're investing just under that. We're not going to solve all the constraints, with this project, but just imagine we could reduce those losses by a third. That's an extra 560 million in grain growers' pockets every year. Not just 1 year, every year. So where are we as growers? Where are we going to get our next major increase in production from? Is it going to be genetics, where the percentage increase is low? And we know it's very slow to get to market, about 8+ years. Is it technology? If we look at the last 25 years, the only major production boost we've had is probably no-till. Or is it blue sky, where the probability of something is extremely low? A lot of us will probably be retired from farming before that happens. I think it'll come from solving subsoil constraints. To me, this is the low-hanging fruit. We can do this now. Not all of it's going to be immediate. If we look at subsoil acidity, we know that that takes time to solve. But we do know there's been some big yield gains from things like moldboarding, deep ripping, and solving subsoil acidity. So it's all about, really, as we know, growing more grain from the same rainfall, so our water use efficiency. We can't change our rainfall, we all know that, unless you sell and go to Kojonup or something. We all can't farm in the same area. So we need to get more out of the rainfall we're getting. So the trend in farming has been to farm deeper into the subsoils to increase the size of the bucket. With bigger programs in farming, we've got heavier machinery. Paul Blackwell's work has shown that the compaction is now deeper as a result of these heavier machines. So we're talking 50 centimetres instead of 30 centimetres. We used to rip from at 20 to 30 centimetres, now it's 50 centimetres and delving at 80 centimetres. We used to plough at 10 centimetres. In fact, the old guys would have a heart attack if you ploughed any deeper than that. Now we're ploughing at 30 centimetres. And we're doing more subsoil, deeper samples in recent times. So as growers, where do we invest our dollar to get our maximum return? As an agronomist or a consultant, a great quote I like is, he said, sustainability stops at the bank account. So we can only spend that dollar once. And we need, as growers, we need to get the best bang for our buck. So do we spend it on deep ripping on certain soils? Is it applying more lime and incorporating that lime to depth? Is it going to control traffic, or is it solving one of the other subsoil constraints? These projects in this initiative can hopefully provide these answers. So the steering committee have identified that the economic analysis is crucial, as Bob mentioned, to the success of this initiative. There's a big focus on extension. We've had a lot of discussion on how we can do this better. And unless this generates practice change in the paddock, we're not going to get a return at all on this investment. And I don't believe we'll get practice change unless we get that economic analysis and the extension right.
Okay, well, as a farmer, I'm on the steering committee. I want to make sure we get the best bang for our buck both ways. I want to see our GRDC levies invested wisely into good research and good results. And also I want to see good, I guess, practice change on farm and getting best bang for our buck. Because as a farmer, this is a picture of an operation on our property. This is 2 years ago. And up till this stage, we've actually been doing some deep ripping, and we did a bit of spading the year before. We've been pouring on lots and lots of lime. And we've only got probably about a third of our property that is this sort of yellow sandplain country. So anyway, this year we decided we'd hop in and do a bit of deep ripping. We thought we'd do 60 hectares, and we thought we'd better do the paddock next door, so we'd do another 100, so 160 hectares for a trial. And this is the end result. You know, we get down there, we've converted this, this paddock was out to pasture for a year because it wasn't performing. Now we've got 2 and 3 tonne of lime on top, we've inverted it, we did a bit of soil that year that crop yielded 3 tonne. If we hadn't have done that, I reckon it would have yielded probably about 1.8. So to me, that is good bang for my buck for the investment of what we're putting in. The following year we did a bit of soil testing. We came back and our pH wasn't too bad. We thought we might have to put another 2 tonne of lime on top. We haven't done that yet. We will do this year. We grew a 3 tonne barley crop on the second year on this paddock, on a year that finished very sharply last year. So I guess what I'm saying here is that this job here was only a 45 inversion. It wasn't perfect. It buried most of the weed seeds. It buried most of the non-wetting. We got some deep ripping done. So we got quite a few jobs done in one pass. So I think even in a poor operation, it's still not bad bang for our buck, you know, getting a return almost double a yield. So I guess that as a steering committee member, I just want to make sure that over the next few years, we get results on the ground. I'm very passionate that we get a good communication strategy out there, and that, as John has said and GRDC keeps saying, we get some practice change. So I probably don't have any much more to say other than that, except through practice change, hopefully we can get some better water use efficiency. On our property, we're sitting probably around about 14 to 15 after this season, kilograms millimetre rainfall. I think the potential is, we're banding around last night, is 22. So what are we doing wrong to get that, to get that moisture? So as I think, just to reiterate what Bob and Nick said earlier on in the previous room, it's going to be those little 1%ers that are probably going to get us there. And hopefully us in the medium rainfall and the guys out in the eastern areas, we can all get together and make a better farming practice.